up, Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Breaking History. This is episode 113. I'm your host, Gordon McCormick. Going to do something a little different today. Matt is traveling due to GART. He's had quite the odyssey. I think it took him like an extra day to get to GART because he was stopped by DHS, interrogated for a number of hours, missed his flight. Air Canada wouldn't rebook him. And then on the return flight, or like while we were at GART, the all Canadian flight attendants went on strike, and so he couldn't take his plane home. He couldn't rebook. He's like, I think he's on a bus right now, crossing the border. So I don't know. Anyway, couldn't make the show today. I'll let him tell the whole odyssey. But the point is that he made a lot of sacrifices to come to GART. We appreciate him for that. I also have my my daughter's meet the teacher conference scheduled for the start time of the show, noon Eastern. So I'll be doing that. It's 10:30 right now. I just figured I would, rather than canceling the show, I figured I would just do a 1-hour solo show to kind of cover what I'm working on, what I've been researching. This won't be a fully comprehensive dive into this subject, but I think it'll be 1 hour of good information that we can build on in the future. And that investigation that I'm working on revolves around the Promise software scandal, otherwise kind of known as the Octopus Murders on Netflix. I haven't watched that series or program. John and Zach just told me that it's connected to the Promise software investigation. So I'm not really going to be talking about the Octopus Murders here, but I'll be talking about some of the stuff around it, and maybe when I do a more comprehensive dive, we'll get into the Octopus Murders. But before we go any further, let's say thank you to one of our sponsors, and that would be Goldco. So today will be a condensed, maybe like a 1-hour show. Have you heard about President Trump's impact on gold? Every time Trump's name surges in the headlines, gold goes with it. It happened the day he took office, and it's still going up. Gold doesn't just like Trump, it rallies around him. If you bought gold the day after or the day he became president, you'd be up almost $400 an ounce by now. Here's the thing. Gold has been used as a store of value for centuries. The government can't easily manipulate it, and it's known as a hedge against market risk and inflation. How high will the price of gold go under Trump's second term? Will gold continue to break record after record in 2025 and beyond? Learn about an IRS loophole that allows you to diversify your savings with gold and silver, tax and penalty free, with a free copy of gold and silver kit sent directly to your doorstep. Plus, you could qualify for up to a 10% instant match and bonus silver. Visit badlandsgold.com to learn how you can add gold to your portfolio. That's badlandsgold.com. All right, so let's see if I can fix my screen. So we're gonna tie into this. I thought Breaking History is probably a good format to do this because this is a historical event. There have been prosecutions and lawfare related to this. There have been books written about this. There's a lot to tie into. It connects Robert Maxwell to, I think, the current situation that's unfolding geopolitically and domestically for that matter. So again, this is not going to be a comprehensive dive into this subject matter. We're just going to kind of scratch the surface. But I think as I walk through this story, and who knows what the exact, what the exact story is. It seems like maybe some of the official narratives that have been told to us through the formats of, books written may not be the exact truth. It may be, kind of a cover story, but generally speaking, I think we can kind of parse what's actually going on here. And it all has to do with intelligence agencies and, which intelligence agency is to blame for certain scandals and a lot of finger pointing. But anyway, this will tie into the episode of the Book of Trump that I did a few months ago on Robert Maxwell. This is a continuation of that. I do plan to do a second follow-up episode on Robert Maxwell with a guest. And so this episode that we're doing right now of Breaking History is almost a bridge between those two episodes. I think you can probably think of it like that. So let me share my screen. We'll get rolling. So let's see. So this is part of the Robert Maxwell, as I said, discussion. Now, in that first episode of that I did on him on the Book of Trump, I mentioned the Inns Law scandal, but because there were so many other things that I was going through high level, I didn't really get a chance to go down the rabbit hole of the Inns Law scandal, at least the official narrative as it's told. And this is Inns Law right here. So let's talk about what Inns Law is, what Promise is, and then kind of set the stage for how Robert Maxwell ties into this. Because ultimately what this really is this is potentially an explanation for how organizations like Mossad, but if you think of Mossad and the CIA is basically the same thing. They're just two faces of the same organization, the same transnational cartel, so to speak. This is how they would have gotten leverage over criminal politicians in every single country in the world. That's this story here. And that's really the essence of, I think, what Mossad does, as I understand it. The CIA is known for regime change operations, color revolutions, psychological warfare operations against populations via media and news reporting and information dissemination. Whereas it seems like Mossad's specialty is more in character assassination or just physical, actual kinetic assassination, targeting people for leverage, bribing people, blackmailing people, controlling bottlenecks of power is really where I think Mossad has found their niche versus the CIA. But again, I think these organizations all kind of work hand in glove. So Inns Law is a company that was founded by a guy named Dr. Earl Bryan in the 1970s. I think it was 1973. And it was originally founded as 1973. It was the predecessor for it was, I guess technically it was founded in 1980 as a commercial company. 1981 is what it says right here. But originally before that, it was known as the Institute for Law and Social Research, which was a nonprofit organization in 1973. And the purpose of the nonprofit organization was to acquire funds, file for grants to the federal government, acquire funds related to this crackdown on crime. In the 70s, there was a lot of destabilizing criminal, crime waves, and so the response was to almost like militarize the police. A lot of money was pumped in at the federal level to provide assistance to local law enforcement, kind of like what we saw in the 1920s when the proliferation of organized crime syndicates, mostly recruiting veterans of World War I who were highly trained in warfare operations, and so they understood how to use automatic weapons, how to work as a unit, how to go into a bank, rob the bank, whereas local law enforcement, the local cops, did not have automatic weapons and were much less equipped from a training and preparation standpoint to deal with, military style bank robberies, which is what organized crime, Al Capone, those guys were doing. So 1970s, similar patterns of crime waves evolving. And so the answer is to clamp down with federal funding. And so groups like the Institute for Law and Social Research were created to acquire the funding that was being offered by the federal government and then use that funding to develop tools, resources, training, equipment for law enforcement across the country. And in many ways, this was an effort to federalize, I think, law enforcement across the country, because one of the things they did that I took note of was that they offered the money that they had been that they were offering in the 1970s to these local law enforcement at the local level and state level. They threatened to pull that funding unless those law enforcement outfits removed the minimum height requirement for women, or really just for anybody. But one of the things is that all of these police departments or sheriff's departments had minimum height requirements for if you wanted to become a cop. And so the federal government said, this is prejudice against particularly women, but just anyone who is short. So they had him remove that requirement, and then all of a sudden more women could become cops overnight. And again, I think this was an effort, kind of like with pushing women into the military, an effort to kind of just water down the quality of physical abilities of law enforcement officials. So there's a guy whose name was Bill Hamilton. So Bill Hamilton was a former spook in Vietnam. He worked at the NSA. He was, I think, notably in the same unit in Vietnam as who is it? Was it not? It's not Bill Cooper, but the head of the CIA, whose name escapes me, but I think it might be Cooper, Bill Cooper. And so basically the spook Bill Hamilton goes on to work for the U.S. for the NSA after serving in Vietnam, like in the early days of Vietnam in the 1960s. And he starts this nonprofit organization in 1973. And then here is the omnibus crime bill that I was referencing, the LEAA. The LEAA was established by the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968. It was abolished in 1982. Its predecessor agency was the Office of Law Enforcement Assistance, which lasted from 1965 to 1968. Its successors agencies were the Office of Justice Assistance, Research and Statistics, and the Office of Justice Programs. The LEAA included the National Institute of Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice, which had its functions absorbed by the National Institute of Justice on December 27th, 1979, with the passage of the Justice System Improvement Act of 1979. The act, which amended the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, also led to the creation of the Bureau of Justice Statistics. LEAA created the National Advisory Commission on Criminal Justice Standards and Goals. The LEAA was criticized for various reasons, including mismanagement of funds, concerns about exacerbating police militarization, and not effectively reducing crime. In response to these criticisms and changing political and fiscal priorities, the LEAA was phased out and eventually abolished by the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act amendments of 1981. Its functions were absorbed by other parts of the Department of Justice. And then here's the initiative I was talking about. In March 1973, the LEAA ordered any police department receiving federal funding to end minimum height requirements, which most women could not meet. And then it goes on to talk about the Stress, Stop the Robberies, Enjoy Safe Streets Act in Detroit, and the Crash Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums in Los Angeles. So again, the LEAA, I think I have that. Where is it? LEAA. I want to make sure I have the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration. Part of Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Crime program. So this is after JFK is killed. Lyndon B. Johnson starts a war on crime, creates this, the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, and the LEAA is birthed out of that, the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration. So the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration then is what directs funding to the other group that I'd mentioned, which is the Institute for Law and Social Research. So the Institute for Law and Social Research is started by this guy, Bill Hamilton, the spook from Vietnam, who then in 1981, when it becomes clear, because the bill is signed, it looks like in January of 1981, but in 1980 it becomes clear this is going to happen, that this the funding is basically being cut off to the NGO. So it no longer makes sense for the Institute for Law and Social Research to operate as an NGO. He decides to take the product, so to speak, that it had developed commercial, and to offer it as a commercial product to governments, law enforcement agencies, not just in America, but around the world. And that company that it becomes is known as Inslaw. Okay. Now, the product that Bill Hamilton created in the 1970s, when it was still an NGO, the Institute for Law and Social Research, is what is known as the PROMIS software. So what is PROMIS? Okay. Development of PROMIS, and it's PROMIS, Prosecutors Management Information System, was a case management software developed by Inslaw. The software program was developed with aid from the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration to aid prosecutors' offices in tracking cases. PROMIS software was originally written in COBOL. It's a type of code, I believe, for use on mainframe computers. Later, a version was developed to run on 16-bit mini computers, such as the Digital Equipment Corporation PDP-11. And then it goes on to explain the primary users of this early version of the software were the United States Attorney's Office of the District of Columbia and the state and local law enforcement. Both the mainframe and 16-bit mini computer versions of PROMIS were developed under LEAA contracts. And in later litigation, both Inslaw and DOJ eventually agreed that the early version of PROMIS was in the public domain, meaning that neither the institute nor its successor had exclusive rights to it. So again, Bill Hamilton created this NGO. It's publicly funded by a bill that is passed in the 1960s by Lyndon Johnson. And this NGO is responsible for developing a software, a database that streamlines criminal cases for prosecutors, namely attorney generals, U.S. attorneys. But then eventually it trickles down to state and local prosecutors as well. But again, this is being developed with public funding by an NGO that is operating under the Department of Justice, effectively. When that money dries up and it becomes clear that dynamic is gonna end, that's when Bill Hamilton shifts and decides to take his NGO and make it a for-profit organization. And that's when he incorporates Inslaw in 1980, I guess officially in 1981, January of 1981. Now, Inslaw takes this commercial product of PROMIS, or takes this product that was, again, later determined in court cases to belong to the public domain because it was created with public funding. And he starts soliciting from the Reagan White House, because Hamilton was working in the Reagan White House. He begins to solicit contacts, basically, for when his company goes private and he's going to start selling the software. Now, the official story, as told by Gordon Thomas, who is a writer who's written extensively about Mossad and has kind of become an authority of sorts on Mossad. The official story that he presents, and it's not just him, it's Bill Hamilton, filing lawsuits and there being some lawfare here, is that Bill Hamilton and his wife had this company, Inslaw. It was a small it's presented in the book as kind of this small startup. But again, I just gave you the real background of it. But in the book, Israeli Super Spy, Robert Maxwell Israeli Super Spy, which is, let me just show you this book. Robert Maxwell, Israel Super Spy, The Life and Murder of a Media Mogul, by Gordon Thomas and Martin Dillon. In this book, he kind of presents Inslaw as like this victim, this little startup that that Bill Hamilton and his wife run it, and they have these employees, and they're basically just trying to make it as a startup. That's kind of how he presents it. There is a web of people that we kind of need to talk about. The first would be Madison Brewer. So Madison Brewer, he worked, his position is a little unclear to me because it's kind of presented in the book that he's working as a DOJ official, but the more I looked into him, it looks like he also officially worked for Inslaw. I think what really his position was is he was some sort of a go-between. He was like the middleman between this proto organization, the one that came before Inslaw, the Institute for Law and Social Research, and the DOJ. He was the go-between. So I guess he worked at the DOJ, but technically was an employee of this NGO, and then eventually became an employee of Inslaw. But even after Inslaw was a private company in the early 1980s, he continued to hold a desk at DOJ and was working at DOJ. And I guess the ostensible explanation was that he was the guy on the ground to help with the software, because inevitably there are going to be issues with these prosecutors using the software, and that need to be resolved in real time. So Hamilton, Brewer is approached by a guy named Rafi Eaton. Okay. Now, Rafi Eaton, I think I'm saying his name right. He was an Israeli politician and an intelligence officer. He's described as kind of like this big, burly gorilla kind of a guy. I think gorilla is the word they use, like that Gordon Thomas used to describe him, just to give you a sense of his physical presence. Gristly voice, man of few words, views intelligence work as the kind of work where you don't want to be jovial or congenial or like making friends. There are no friends in the intelligence world, according to this guy. And anyone who tries to act like they're everybody's friend is somebody that you can't trust. He's kind of one of those people like stand back, remain quiet, and just observe everything. Now, one of the notable scandals that he becomes involved in is the Jonathan Pollard affair. Jonathan Pollard, of course, was arrested by the U.S. government and imprisoned for decades as an Israeli spy. I believe he was released and sent back to Israel by the Trump administration at the end of the first Trump term. So again, that's something that we'll talk about on the follow-up, the second half of the Robert Maxwell part 2. But Eitan he had to resign. He had to take responsibility and resign over Jonathan Pollard's arrest, and the finger being pointed that, hey, this guy was working for Mossad and he's a Israeli spy by the U.S. government. So in 1981, he's appointed to the head of the Bureau of Scientific Relations. And at that point, that is an agency that's on that is described as an intelligence entity on par with Mossad, Aman, and Shabak. Aman being the military intelligence, and Shabak being police intelligence. The Shin Bet, I think, is what it's called now, if I'm not mistaken. And so Eitan is discovers this promised software. He realized the official story, and again, I'm not fully convinced that the official story that Gordon Thomas is telling us is actually the truth. I think Zach shares that skepticism. But the official story that Gordon Thomas tells is that in 1981, this product is licensed by Inslaw to the CIA. We learned that later. That fact is not really discussed early on in Gordon Thomas's book. They really focus more on this angle, and that's Rafi Eitan going to the DOJ in, I think it was 1983 is the year, sometime between 1981 and 1983. This is when this is all unfolding. And he goes to the DOJ in Washington. He flies to Washington. He presents himself as a guy named Dr. Orr, O-R-R. He uses, which I believe was a real person, but he was assuming somebody else's identity, presents himself as a representative of the Israeli government, but nothing that would have implied that he was intelligence or Mossad. And basically explains to Brewer, this guy down here, that he is interested in the Israeli government is interested in acquiring a promise and using promise in Israel. So Brewer sets up a meeting between Eitan and Hamilton, and Eitan travels to DC and then travels to Inslaw's home office and meets with them at the office. And then they do a demonstration for him at their office, roll out the red carpet for him, all that kind of stuff. And they see it. It's presented in the book that Hamilton views as a huge opportunity for his company, Inslaw, to start marketing this product to foreign governments, not just the U.S. government and state governments. So Eitan, as he's watching the demonstration in the official story, he comes to realize how powerful this software is and how important this software is, and the real opportunity here. And the real opportunity here isn't to streamline law enforcement and coordinate, the prosecution of criminal cases, where if two prosecutors are working on a case that overlaps, they should be working together. And that's where this promise software would kind of identify those overlaps and let them know, hey, you two should be speaking to one another. He sees the opportunity as we, the Israeli government or Mossad, should be selling this product with a back door, a trap door installed in it, so we can access the prosecutor's database in every single country or agency that we sell it to. And then we can get a direct mirror of their server, and we will know who they are investigating, who, like where the smoke is. And then you can leverage that information to blackmail those officials who ostensibly would not have been charged yet officially if they were still under investigation. But the Mossad would then be able to front run that, go warn these people that they're under investigation, and then leverage that information to blackmail them, and then basically protect those people once they become assets of Mossad and promote them to higher levels within whichever government they are. It's not just the U.S. government. It could be Guatemala, it could be France, it could be Canada, it could be whoever they sell the software to. Okay, that's the opportunity. So again, I'm of the opinion that the CIA and the Mossad are the exact same thing. And if the CIA was using the claim is that the CIA was sold this software by Bill Hamilton in 1981, and maybe they put the trapdoor in, or maybe I think they claim that the trapdoor was already in it. Again, a lot of finger pointing at everyone else. It was them doing it, not us. But I just view them all as kind of the same thing. The blob, as Mike Benz would call them. And so the challenge here for Eitan is he has to acquire this software, and he has to deconstruct it and then put it back together so it doesn't look like in a forensic analysis that it's the same software that Bill Hamilton's company Inslaw created. And so that's exactly what it does. So after he leaves the meeting at the Inslaw office, they don't give him a copy of the software. He's like, I'm going to go home and I'm going to go home and I'm going to talk to my people in Israel, and we'll let you know. But I'm very impressed. Have a good day. And so Hamilton's excited. He leaves. When he goes back to meet with Brewer, he tells Brewer, hey, Brewer asked, did you get a copy of the disc? This is the official story. And he said, oh, you know what? I did, but I left it back at the Inslaw office. Shucks. And so Madison Brewer says, no problem. Turns to this guy, Jack Ruff, I think is how you say his name. It's either Rugg or Ruff. And he was a DOJ employee, and instructs him and says, hey, give him a copy of the promise to take home to Israel so they can take a look at it and talk about it. So Ruff gives, and we know all this because this was all adjudicated later in criminal and civil prosecutions, where this was all detailed out in court of law. So Jack Ruff gives Eitan a copy. Eitan leaves the DOJ, gets on the plane, flies back to Israel, and then he brings together the best computer scientists that he knows and assigns them with the task of deconstructing the software and putting it back together in such a way that it looks like a totally new piece of property, a new piece of IP, and it's totally unique, so that when they go to sell it and market it, Bill Hamilton can't say that's my software. But however, that ends up being exactly what happens. And the courts agree that this is his software, but that's later on in the story. We probably won't even get to that here in that part in this episode. I really want to get to the official narrative of how they went about doing this. So Rafi Eitan goes to Ari bin Manash. Ari bin Manash, who at this point, this is the early 1980s, Ari bin Manash had been a Mossad agent who was part of this purge that purportedly happened in the late 70s, early 80s, when there was a lot of strife happening after the Yom Kippur War in Israel. And a lot of Mossad agents were allegedly let go, and none of them could basically find work because they were burned. They're within their community, and a lot of them would go to like become school teachers and stuff. Like they couldn't find a job really doing anything except for really, really just low level work, low skill work in their eyes, given their backgrounds. And bin Manash or Menashe, I think is how you say his name, is one of these people. He's a Canadian Israeli dual citizen. And at this point, he is marketing. He's in Tehran. Again, this is early 80s, 2 years, a year or two after the Iranian Revolution. There's still a lot of chaos in Iran, but he's in Tehran trying to sell healthcare software similar to Promise. I mean, it's like database management kind of software, which as computers were coming online and becoming more widely used, this was a common types of IT that was being sold. And so Rafi Eitan brings him in and says, hey, this is your opportunity to come back and work for Mossad. Because at this point, he was persona non grata. He had been burned. He had been expelled from Mossad along with many other people. And Eitan said, this is your path back. I need help. I need you. I have this software. I have a team that is deconstructing it, putting it back together. I have the software now. And he gives it to him and he says, here's the problem. My team tells me that if we, Mossad, put the trap door on ourselves, then it will become very obvious to anyone who is doing a forensic audit of the software that it'll have our fingerprints on it, our signature. So I need you to go out and find a third-party contractor who can put a trap door on this for us. Put together a red team to attack the software, or I'm sorry, go hire someone to put a trap door on it. Then come back to me and we will together put together a red team to like attack the software and make sure that it would pass an audit under the assumption that this trapdoor would even be found. Like this cannot come back. The trapdoor element cannot come back to Mossad in any way. That was the point. So Ari bin Manash goes and finds this guy, Yehuda bin Hanan. So Yehuda bin Hanan, I'll just read this. I'll read this segment from Gordon Thomas's book. It took Ari bin Manash a week to decide upon the man he would use to put the trapdoor on. His name was Yehuda bin Hanan, and he owned a small computer company in California. Ari bin Menashe took a plane to Los Angeles and hired a car on a Friday afternoon. He arrived on Yehuda's doorstep shortly before the Sabbath meal would begin. He was invited to partake in the celebration over the challah bread and wine. The talk was lively and animated, but all the time I was trying to make a judgment. Yehuda was talkative, but was he a blabbermouth? How curious was he? And this is being told in the first person. So Gordon Thomas lists at the beginning of his book all of these people he goes and interviews for this book, including former Mossad directors, former Israeli prime ministers, and Ari bin Menashe is actually one of the big sources for his book. So a lot of the story is told through the perspective of bin Menashe. So this is a quote from him. It says, but all the time I was trying to make a judgment. Yehuda was talkative, but was he a blabbermouth? How curious was he that I had just dropped in after all those years? This is obviously someone who had worked with Mossad before, who had gone on to start a computer company in California. What were his views now on Israel? The sort of questions that are built into my work were called bin Menashe. In all, he spent 5 days with bin Hanan in his factory, his home. on drives around the countryside, even a stroll along the Pacific beach. Finally, he decided that his host could be trusted. Bin Menashe produced a promise software and explained that it belonged to the Israeli government, whom he represented. He added that the software now having been created, there was not one Israeli technician capable of producing a system that would protect it. So he's kind of like, he's telling Gordon Thomas that he lied, he was a little deceptive to Yehuda bin Hanan as to what actually this was, and why he needed this trap door. He's basically saying, there's no Israeli technician that I've come across who can do this. I need you to do it. You're the only guy who can do it. Bin Menashe had anticipated the questions. He smiled and said, quote, I can't tell you what it is for and why it must be protected, but be assured there is a good reason. Mossad, like Mossad, bin Hanan had asked. Now, Yehuda, you know better than to ask that. So obviously this guy, Yehuda, had been some sort of an asset that Mossad had used in the past, or Bin Menashe had used in the past. For 2 days, Yehuda bin Hanan had worked to create the trapdoor. He handed the microchip over to Bin Menashe. Israel will thank you for your thank you for this, Bin Menashe said, giving Bin Hanan $5,000 in $5,000 in bills. Next day, he was back in Tel Aviv. A Lakam. So Lakam is the scientific group like that. That's where Rafi Eitan and Bin Menashe had pulled these programmers from to deconstruct the software and put it back together. So a Lakam programmer took the microchip and inserted it into a copy of Promise. Now it needed to be tested under field conditions. So now they were going to put together this red team who was going to attack it and make sure that it could not be traced back to Mossad. If the trapdoor, which was designed to look invisible, it was designed, and I'm not a computer programmer, so this is beyond my expertise, but it was designed so that if you took it apart, basically the trapdoor would become invisible and you wouldn't be able to look for it unless you knew it was there. But if you were to discover it, there's no way that you could say definitively, well, Mossad or Israel was the one who did this. It could have just as easily been it would have more likely been, or the assertion could be that somebody else along the way between the sale of it and the end user, somebody else put the trapdoor in. That was the idea. So Ari Bin Menashe is then tasked with, and Rafi Eitan, Ari Bin Menashe is tasked with going and putting the red team together. He's also tasked with going and working with the person who was identified as really the opportunist in all of this to commercialize this product. And that would be Dr. Earl Bryan. So Dr. Earl Bryan was an American physician. It says right here on his Wikipedia, was an American physician and businessman who served as director of California's Department of Health Care Services, and then as secretary of California's Agency for Health and Welfare under Governor Ronald Reagan. Following an unsuccessful run for U.S. Senate in 1974, Bryan headed several technology-based firms during the 1970s and 1980s. In 1991, however, Info Technology, the venture capital firm he headed, filed for bankruptcy. Bryan was later charged with conspiring to cover up the firm's financial difficulties and sentenced to 4 years in prison. So again, this is the guy who worked under the Reagan White governorship when Reagan was in California, and then he worked later under the Reagan White House in the 1980s. So let's see. We have Dr. Bryan and we have Bill Hamilton, and Dr. Bryan is approached by this woman, or a dear friend of his, Ursula Meese, and she is the wife of Edwin Meese. Edwin Meese was the U.S. Attorney General under Reagan. And this would have been a few years before Meese would have become the U.S. Attorney. At that point, I think he was an attorney working in the Reagan administration, if I'm not mistaken. But his wife, Ursula Meese, they were both friends with Dr. Bryan, and Ursula Meese was a very good friend. And according to what Gordon Thomas was told and reported, she was the one who encouraged Dr. Bryan to pursue a commercial version of Promise. And so Dr. Bryan says, okay, let's do this. And that's when his interests and Ben Menashe and Rafi Eitan's interests all align. And so Bryan is tasked with, how are we going to take this product that Mossad now has and bring it to market in America without getting in trouble for basically stealing this IP from Inslaw, from Bill Hamilton. Again, this is all the official narrative. Who knows if any of this is true? It could have just been all these people working together. I'm just trying to help communicate what the official narrative is, as we know. So they go and approach a guy named Ira Gersten Rosenfeld. And so Ira Gersten Rosenfeld is a senior member at Nesbitt Thompson, which is a basically like a hedge fund, an investment firm, financial investment firm, firm in Montreal, in Canada. And Dr. Bryan solicits them to buy Promise, to be buyers of the Promise software, and then go figure out how to, sell it to others. And so instead, Rosenfeld is worried about conflicts of interest because Nesbitt Thompson has connections to the Reagan White House and to DOJ. And so they're worried about, we can't really be the ones going out and marketing this software because we have relationships with the DOJ and the White House. So it's probably better for us to create a new company. We, Nesbitt Thompson, which is now known as Nesbitt Thompson and Company. There's their background. Founded in 1912 by Arthur Nesbitt and Peter Thompson. The firm is headquartered on St. James Street in Montreal, Quebec. And in 1987, Nesbitt Thompson was acquired by the Bank of Montreal, with Brian Steck appointed as president and CEO. So this would have been about 4 or 5 years before that acquisition. This is when this is happening. And so Nesbitt Thompson creates this company, or Rosenfeld helps these guys create this company called Hadron Incorporated. So Hadron Incorporated, they need a front man, who can be the go-between for Rosenfeld and the buyers. And so Dr. Bryan and Rosenfeld are going over this. Rosenfeld says, I have the perfect guy. Now, what's interesting here, this is where I think you kind of can throw some validation to the idea that maybe Gordon Thomas is running a limited hangout with his book. I'm not sure. But the way Gordon Thomas presents Janice Patstore is he kind of presents him as a, let me actually just I'll pull up the passage. Let's pull up the passage of the book. Okay. So Bryan began to promote Promise using the White House switchboard to make and receive calls, because he was working at the White House. So he's using basically his position at the White House while still at the White House, understanding that they're going back, they're going to be leaving the White House soon and going into the private sector, and he's calling contacts, trying to basically lay the groundwork for when he hits the private sector. One of them was to Ira Gersten Rosenfeld, a senior member of the respected Montreal brokerage Nesbitt Thompson. It handled billions of dollars annually and advised thousands of rich clients on investments. Rosenfeld liked the idea of doing business with a man who conducted it from the White House, party of false decorum stuff. But he was also worried about a conflict of interest with his duties as a stockbroker. Bryan told him he had the right man for fronting things. And this was Janice Patstore, a freelance market analyst he had recently met on a trip to Wall Street to seek further funds for Hadron. So this is where it gets a little sketchy. Like, Gordon Thomas is presenting Janice Patstore as a freelance market analyst that Dr. Bryan, who's working out of the White House, brings to the table. However, we learn later on through all the lawfare that was happening and all the investigations. Let me see if I can find the right tab. We learn that let's find the right one. Here we go. Okay. So this is an article by Wired Magazine called The Inslaw Octopus from January 1st, 1993. So this article is from 32 years ago. And it talks about Bill Hamilton and goes into all this stuff because this is when a lot of the lawfare is unfolding. And so down here, it says Bryan was interviewed by Senate investigators in 1992 and denied under oath any connection with the alleged negotiations. He told investigators he did not have a valid passport during October 1980 dates. But according to court documents and interviews, Bryan told Canadian investors in his newly acquired Clinical Sciences Incorporated that he would be in Paris that weekend. Bryan acquired controlling interest in Clinical Sciences in the summer of 1980. Clinical Sciences was then trading at around $2 a share. Bryan worked with Janice Patzor, a vice president and special situations analyst with the Canadian investment bank of Nesbitt Thompson Bongard Incorporated, to create a market of Canadian investors for the stock. So Gordon Thomas, at least according to like the interviews he conducted and what people had brought and what people had told him, Dr. Bryan brought a guy to the table to Rosenfeld. But this guy worked at the same company that Rosenfeld was a senior member at Nesbitt Thompson, but didn't know that that Patzor was a vice president. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would a senior C-suite guy at Nesbitt Thompson? Why would somebody else why would his business partner, let's go back to the visual. What Gordon Thomas is asserting is that Dr. Bryan brought Patzor to the table, despite the fact that Patzor is a vice president under Rosenfeld. It doesn't make any sense. That part tripped me up when I figured that out. Okay. But anyway, that's besides the point. That's just one example of how the official story that Gordon Thomas was reporting doesn't quite align with what is later also being reported. So anyway, Patzor is made the CEO of Hadron. And let me get the quote. I wrote the quote down on my phone. The quote is, this is from Dr. Bryan to Rosenfeld. He says, "This guy, Patzor, needs money, and we can run him up front. If anything goes wrong, he can take the fall." He's explaining this to Rosenfeld, describing Patzor, okay? And what's confusing to me is this guy needs money. He's a freelancer, but he's the vice president at Nesbitt Thompson. So that's one of those things that I need to run down completely. Did he become the vice president after this conversation? After Bryan brings him to Rosenfeld? I'm unclear about that. But anyway, point is that they viewed him as the patsy. He would be the fall guy if anything went south with this. So he's made the CEO of Hadron Incorporated. Dr. Bryan stays on as president so he can be involved. And basically Rosenfeld is the investor. So Rosenfeld acts as the investor using Nesbitt Thompson, pumps money into Hadron. So he's the money. He's the CEO, the chief executive, Patzor. And Dr. Bryan is the president. Okay. And he's leveraging his political contacts to find potential buyers for this software, while this guy is actually the face of the company. Okay. That's kind of the dynamic. So their first client is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They run it. They do a test run of this in 26 locations, 26 stations, I guess, or jurisdictions across Canada. And this kind of becomes their test run for making this program work. And so I think, that kind of brings us to a good place to pause it, because we're coming up on an hour. So I got to do another ad read and kind of wind this thing down. But that's where I am right now. This is what I'm working on. I'm trying to really understand the players that are involved, because, if we bring this full circle, if you go up to Inslaw, this is from the Inslaw Wikipedia, Inslaw won damages. And so what ends up happening is Inslaw, once they realize that they're this promise software, which then goes on, this is all being marketed to prosecutors, right? But eventually there are promise softwares for medical, for military, for like everything, like anything that has data that needs to be synthesized and analyzed like very quickly. A version of promise is developed, and we're basically all of these promise softwares are out there, and they're all called promise. Like that was a decision that Aiton and Ben Menashe decided, and Brian decided they weren't going to use the Inslaw name, obviously, but they were going to keep the promise name of the product because of the acronym that it stands for. The prosecutor, I think it stands for, let me see, where is it? I want to make sure I get the acronym right. Program Resource. So now it stands for Program Resources and Outcome Management Information Systems. Okay. Like here, check this out. This is the original one. This is the one developed by Inslaw. Prosecutors Management Information System. That's what PROMIS stands for. Prosecutors, so PRO is prosecutor, and then MIS is Management Information System. Out of that spins Patient Reported Outcomes Measurement Information System, also PROMIS. Problem-Oriented Medical Information System, also PROMIS. Police Real-Time Online Management Information System, also PROMIS. Program Resource and Outcome Management Information System. So obviously, all of those spinoffs are titling the acronym so that the PRO, instead of standing for prosecutor, they find ways for the PRO to actually stand for what they're doing it for, so they can maintain that promise branding. But, they can kind of shrug their shoulders and play dumb and say, well, we were just doing it because, PRO stands for Program Resources and Outcome. That's PRO, Management Information System. But I think they understand that anyone who hears the word promise is going to understand that it is a database crunching. It's basically a proto AI. That's how it's marketed to all of its clients. And you can see just from what's on the screen right here, how between the police, between the prosecutors, and the medical information, medical healthcare. Imagine all of the data that anybody with a trap door on the back end of this thing are going to get access to everything that would run through this database, and that would give them an incredible amount of power. All right. Let's see. And then the last thing, just to kind of connect it to everything. Inslaw wins damages in bankruptcy court, but they were overturned on appeal. The suit resulted in several Justice Department internal reviews, 2 congressional investigations, the appointment of a special counsel by Attorney General William Barr. Bill Barr creates but not Attorney General Bill Barr under Donald Trump, Attorney General Bill Barr under George Bush. Because remember, Bill Barr was Attorney General under George Bush. A lengthy review of the special counsel's report under Attorney General Janet Reno. Inslaw claims were finally referred by Congress to the Court of Federal Claims in 1995, and the dispute ended with the court's ruling against Inslaw in 1998. During the 12-year-long legal proceedings, Inslaw accused the Department of Justice of conspiring to steal its software, attempting to drive it into Chapter 7 liquidation, using the stolen software for covert intelligence operations against foreign governments, and involvement in a murder. That's the Octopus murders, I believe. These accusations were eventually rejected by the special counsel and the Court of Federal Claims. However, what do I have here? So here is October 12th, 2017. This would have been under the Trump administration. Justice Department, this is from Muckrock. Justice Department records confirm promise scandals ties to Israel. Okay, it says Justice Department documents recently released by the National Archives under the Trump administration confirm what some Inslaw witnesses have been saying for decades, that a copy of promised software was given to Israel. Okay, it says previous records and admissions acknowledge the fact that the software was given to Israel while insisting that it wasn't delivered to Israeli spy master Rafi Eitan, but instead went to Dr. Joseph bin Or, which is that was the pseudonym, like the alias that Eitan was using. According to a Department of Justice memo, however, the man they claim they gave the software to wasn't in the country at the time. The DOJ later asserted that the records on the two Israelis that mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind only a few memos and vague memories. And I believe Joseph bin Or is a real person, so that creates a confusion, because he was a real person that Rafi Eitan pretended to be when he went to meet with the DOJ and Inslaw in the early 1980s. These facts lend a great deal of credence to the statements from Bill Hamilton and others that the phantom Israeli they met was none other than Eitan. But in 1982, two Israelis arrived in the U.S. and went to the DOJ, according to Bob Roeder, then administrator for the DOJ's Office of Legal Policy. The two went to the OLP as part of a prior arrangement that he was unaware of. Instructions came down from the Deputy Attorney General Edward Schmaltz, the number two man in the DOJ, to hire them as experts. They were employed and given a GS-15 salary, the highest tier possible before the executive level, which is reserved for the civilian equivalent of military generals. Wow. The search efforts went well beyond this, contacting multiple offices and the executives and searching record systems that stretch back decades. DOJ's bottom line was that records must have been created these two because they were on the DOJ payroll, but they can't be found. So they were on the payroll, but they can't find who they actually are. Hamilton and others have identified Or as being Eitan. According to Gordon Thomas, the author I've been talking about, Eitan admitted the truth of this to him per Thomas's book and his affidavit, though the DOJ continues to deny the allegations. According to Jack Ruff, or Rugg, who was criticized by a federal judge for his role in the Promise affair at the DOJ, he had received instructions from Madison Brewer to provide a copy of Promise to Dr. bin Or, a representative of the government of Israel. These documents suggest that the instruction was issued between April 22nd, 1983 and May 6th, 1983. On the 6th, he declared that he had made a copy of the software and would provide it to Dr. Or before he leaves the U.S. for Israel on May 16th. On May 12th, Ruff provided a package of Promise software and documentation to Brewer, who provided it to Or. When the DOJ interviewed Or in 1993, however, a crucial fact was revealed. According to his passport, he was out of the country during the period. And that was the benefit, I think, of Eitan using the alias of a real person, because instead of going and chasing a ghost, they went looking for a real person who actually had a physical presence, an actual alibi of where he was. Oh, well, Dr. bin Or wasn't even in the U.S. at the time. He was somewhere else. He was in Israel or whatever. He was out of the country. It says, could not recall who worked for the Solicitor General. After checking his passport, Dr. Or told me that his visas were for September 1982 through April 30th, 1983, and July 15th, 1983 through September 15th, 1983. So he would not have been allowed officially would not have been allowed in the country in May of 1983 when this software was purportedly handed to him per the DOJ. The memo this fact was recorded in does not seem to have been provided to the House Judiciary based on the Judiciary's public report, or had reportedly visited Inslaw in February 1983 when he was still in the country, but the man identified in the photo lineup by Inslaw employees wasn't Or, it was Eitan. According to the account published by Wired, Or had been impressed with the power of Promise, which had recently been updated by Inslaw to run on powerful 32-bit VAX computers from Digital Equipment Corps. Yet he never returned and never bought the software. Instead, he received a copy directly from the Justice Department. When the DOJ reached the real Or in late 1993, he claimed to still have the tape and seemed to expect it would still be readable. According to one of his DOJ memos, he would be making a trip to the U.S. in February 1994 and was willing to bring the tape with him. This apparently never happened. A cover sheet dated March 16th instructs Neil McNeil at the American consulate to give a letter to Orr upon receiving the tape. The attached letter happened to waive any and all claims the DOJ might have against him. So the letter says, furthermore, at your request, the Department of Justice waives any claim it may have against you arising from or related to your possession of the above referenced tape. Sincerely, Don Dwyer, Assistant Associate Attorney General. Despite the attempts to deny the fact that Rafi Eitan received a copy of promise and to discredit those making the claims, these documents offer the first bit of corroborating evidence from the government that the man who received a copy of promise was in fact the Israeli spy master. And then they have the documents here, 39 pages long. And then this all ties into, finally, I know we're over an hour now, but we're not going to do rants because I'll check the boost, but before we do that, I just want to hit this. Trump administration putting 17% tariff on Israel, because what's interesting about this is you look back to the fact that the first Trump administration releases those documents affirming that this stuff happened, affirming that this actually happened, that the promise software was actually stolen by Israel, or was given to Israel, stolen by Israel, that possession of it transferred from the U.S. government to the Israeli government, that actually happened. I'm just waiting for this news article to load. Because what's interesting about this is back when Trump did the whole 90-day pause on the tariffs, remember he came out with that chart and he said we're gonna put a 50% tariff on anyone who is not who doesn't negotiate with us. So you have 90 days to come bring us your best. And I want to find the article from May or from March. Bear with me real quick, because they're trying to show me an article from 3 weeks ago, but I want the article from 3 months ago. Here we go. Haaretz, Trump. This is from April, right? Yeah, April 3rd. Trump's Liberation Day tariffs will also apply to Israel a day after Israel eliminated all tariffs. Because remember, the night before, Trump said this is the deadline. Like, everyone, you have until, I think it was Liberation Day was April 1st. You have until April 1st to bring me your best offer. And then he came out with that board, and it had a list of all the different tariffs they're putting on people. And it had said 17% on Israel. Now, the night before, Ron Dermer and Netanyahu called Trump and tried to negotiate. I think it was Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, called the Trump administration and tried to negotiate. They said, look, we're going to drop our tariff to 0% tariff for anything coming from the U.S. to Israel. Trump administration said, oh, that's great. Thank you so much. You're still getting a 17% tariff. Now, when they were asked about that, this is where it gets interesting. They were asked about that by a anonymous Trump official who didn't want to be named, was asked, well, why are you still doing a 17% tariff if Israel's dropping theirs? And the response was, Haaretz is not reporting the response. But I know for a fact that the Times of Israel does report it. Here it is. Come on now. There we go. So here's the same story. Here's the picture of Trump standing next to Howard Lutnick with the list of all the countries and their tariff. Now here it is. It says, Trump, for decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike, Trump said. And it said, Trump argued that the tariffs are needed to reclaim money and respect that other countries have taken from the United States. His critics, including most mainstream economists, say they will wreak havoc on the global economy and translate largely into higher prices for U.S. consumers. Ahead of Trump's speech, an administration official told reporters that, quote, Israel steals a lot of intellectual property from, for example, the pharmaceutical manufacturers in this country. Basically justifying, saying, hey, they're going to pay us back for all this intellectual property they've stolen from us. Interesting, they say to the pharmaceutical manufacturers, but I think they're also referring to the Promise software. That's just my, and the fact that it's 17%, interesting number. It is 50% of the 33% tariff that Israel had on us, which was the standard of what they were doing for all these reciprocal tariffs. But yes, very interesting. We're going to have to wrap up here. This is obviously a really, really great rabbit hole, though. And I think, lays the groundwork for this is how, now again, now how does this all tie in? Well, Robert Maxwell was working with Eitan. He was working with these people. These people are all become connected to Robert Maxwell. And that's what we'll do on the second follow-up to Trump, on the book of Trump, is we will talk more about how does Robert Maxwell play into the story that we just outlined, and how does that potentially connect to Jeffrey Epstein, to Ghislaine Maxwell, and to Bill Barr, and to who opened an investigation into this in the early 90s when he was the Attorney General under George Bush. And yes, we will get into that. So please hit the thumbs up if you are watching this. This is a pre-recorded show. So I'm going to be in a meeting with my I'm going to try to capture all the boosts, all the rants. If there are any rants, I will read them next week. We'll read them with Matt. Appreciate everybody being here. Sorry that this had to be pre-recorded. Hit the thumbs up. I am going to do the other ad read, which is our friends at Loaded Gun Coffee. Love Loaded Gun Coffee. Wake up to the bold flavors of Loaded Gun Coffee, where passion, precision, and patriotism infuse every sip. As a veteran-owned business, we ensure each cup is steeped in pride and unwavering commitment. Their roasters handpick the finest coffee beans from around the world and have mastered unique brewing methods. Their skilled farmers cultivate the coffee to embody the essence of duty and honor in every meticulously crafted blend. But it's far more than just coffee. It's a family and enduring commitment to freedom, with military veterans tracing their legacy back to the Civil War, including Purple Heart recipients. Loaded Gun Coffee is a brewed testament of pride and honor, dedicated to preserving the integrity and strength of our beloved nation. They proudly stand as fierce advocates for a secure border and a strong America. And stay loaded. Stay loaded, Badlanders, with Loaded Gun Coffee. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/loaded and enter promo code Badlands for 10% off your purchase. That's badlandsmedia.tv/loaded, promo code Badlands. And I can't say enough good things about Loaded Gun Coffee. They've come to multiple GARTs. I've had the opportunity to meet them. They're great people. Their coffee is delicious. So please go support them. Support the people who support Badlands. We are big fans of Loaded Gun Coffee here. Please hit the thumbs up. Thanks again, everybody. We will be back next week in full force with Matt and have plenty to discuss. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.